and get Marinova on stage, who is going to talk about AthenaDAO and the DAO concept to accelerate research for reproductive aging. Thank you, Maria. Oh, of course, you need the mic.
Hello, everyone. I'm Maria Marinova, and happy to represent AthenaDAO today. Thank you, Max, for the invitation. Today I want to focus a bit on reproductive aging and what have we been doing in AthenaDAO around that. So there is a big problem in healthcare in general, and that's leaving half of the population behind. There are a few gaps in that space, mainly the science and data gap. We have been excluding female animals from scientific studies or female patients from clinical trials. And it's been only legally required to include women in trials for the past 20 years. So a lot of the approved drugs that we're using today, we still don't know what the effects on women's health are. There is also a big funding gap, and only 11% of the NIH budget goes towards 50% of the population. And I'm going to elaborate a bit on that later, but that's still generous, those 11%. Those two gaps come together to form a market gap, and there is huge need for female-specific therapeutics on the market for very common conditions that we have zero solutions for at the moment. So as I mentioned, 11% of NIH budget go towards women's health, but turns out most of those funds are for oncology and female-specific cancers like breast and ovarian cancer. And only 1% of those go towards all of the other female-specific conditions. And a non-existent portion of that goes to reproductive aging and longevity. Even within the longevity space, reproductive longevity has been very overlooked. And I'm sure this slide has already made the rounds, but it turns out reproductive longevity is second to last in terms of startup funding by category. And it's after pet longevity, which is great for dogs, but not so good for women. But there is another problem. We can't really fund reproductive aging startups if there are none. And the problem here is that there is not enough research being done to have something to commercialize in those areas, both generally in women's health and specifically in reproductive longevity. So AthenaDAO is trying to address this problem by coming in at an earlier stage and funding scientific research with translational potential. We are a decentralized community that funds, govern, and incubate translational women's health. So we think we can step in and address the problem because we can come in at university academic science projects pre-IP where venture capital firms cannot invest. And later on use those IP assets to spin out companies in women's health. We use novel funding mechanisms to facilitate that. We use on-chain technologies and tap into a different pool of money, both sourcing funding from the community by a token launch, which I'll tell you about later on, and just a different pool of crypto investors that are new to biotech in general. And apart from funding, we are a global female-led movement, and we focus on education and providing resources as well, because there is so much miscommunication and misinformation, just lack of information in the space. Our vision is to be the leading decentralized global community to drive translational and transformative research in women's health. And luckily, I'm following on from Max, so you already know everything there is to know about DAOs. But I'll tell you why AthenaDAO is following the DAO model and it's not a company. We think this is essential for us to connect the community of researchers and the general community of women that can actually benefit from the research and those solutions. We're doing that through the blockchain and Web3 mechanisms, again, using a token model and governance to engage the community to actually make decisions around what is funded and how. And again, we tap into a different pool of funders through the blockchain as well. We think this is a unique opportunity to fund traditionally overlooked area of science like women's health, because there is a big community and a big need for it behind that problem. So while we were funding all women's health that has been overlooked, we decided to focus on a few initial target areas as main research pillars. And currently we have an open round for applications for endometriosis and polycystic ovarian syndrome. But our first round was in ovarian aging and reproductive longevity. Our first AthenaDAO reproductive health report also focused on that topic. We wrote a big overview of the state of the field based on a few conferences we've attended that year and interviewed a number of experts in the field in aging, fertility, and gynecology. So why do we want to focus on reproductive aging and women's reproductive longevity? We know that women already live longer than men, so what's the problem? Turns out they live longer but in poorer health, and we see exactly when health starts to decline, and that's the point of menopause over there. So women's health span is directly dependent on ovarian age and ovarian function. However, something starts to decline much earlier than menopause, around 35 years on average. The ovary starts to decline much faster. So at this point here, something takes a downward turn, and we don't really know what's happening, and we don't know why. But if it wasn't so, our lives could look much different later in life. And that dotted line shown there is what happens with the male reproductive system. It follows a much gradual decline. So ovaries in general age twice as fast as the rest of the body, and we haven't really looked into why or how can we prevent this so far. But we know that it's very important for women's health span and that young ovary transplantation into old mice can extend the lifespan. And while that's to a big extent due to estrogen, it's not the whole picture, because ovaries, young ovaries that have been depleted from oocytes and follicles and do not secrete estrogen actually extend lifespan more in old mice. So do we have any solutions? Not really. We have IVF, which is the most common one. It addresses certain types of fertility issues. However, definitely not for everyone, definitely not a panacea, and it doesn't do anything for ovarian aging, which is the underlying problem. And that's exactly what we're interested in. So in our previous round of funding, we chose 3 projects that address underlying causes of ovarian aging. So our first funded project, only a few weeks ago, and our first minted IP NFT is led by Mario Cordero, who unfortunately couldn't join us here today, but he's working on the role of C-gas sting pathway and senescence in ovarian aging. We also have a very exciting project coming up next as our next IP NFT by Joshua Johnson in the University of Colorado. He's targeting the integrated stress response to enhance ovarian follicle survival and growth. And last but not least, we have selected Lu Dong, who is performing a project with in vitro assays to screen for longevity drugs that could extend ovarian lifespan and delay ovarian aging using C. elegans, with the idea to move on to higher organisms later on. She's based in Singapore in Brian Kennedy's lab. And that's our team. Laura and Ines are working tirelessly on working the DAO, and Stefano and myself are here at ARDD, so please come and reach out if you want to work with us. I want to thank all of our contributors, some of who are here today, like Cassie and Max. And it's been a very busy year for AthenaDAO. We've gone through 0 to funding projects, fundraising and publishing a few public goods, but I'm gonna skip over that just to save some time because we have some very exciting news. We're actually launching the AthenaDAO token in only a few days. So our token launch starts on the 31st of August. And it's going to be 5 days, with the last day of the auction being the most important day. It's a fair token launch, so everybody can contribute some funds, get even a small amount of tokens that will allow you to participate in the DAO's governance. So you could vote on what kind of projects are getting funded, which areas of research you want to focus on next, as well as government decisions and running the DAO. So we have created a whitelist for ARDD, so you can scan the code if you want to participate. So thank you. Any questions?
All right, do we have any questions?
It seems like you are an intermediary between like venture capital and, I guess, academic research. What additional support do you provide in like comparison to venture capital? Like you say, there's a different venture, like a different pool that you reach through being part of the crypto space. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I would say the major difference is that we can come in at an earlier stage and support a purely academic research with the potential to produce IP. So we come in pre-IP and then have the IP NFT as an asset that we could develop and spin out into a company. And we do that with the support of the community. So first, when we're doing the due diligence, we have a much wider array of scientists that can chip in. And we believe that's a more rigorous approach than having a few things decide on every project. And then the community is supporting, giving feedback for the development of the project as well. And I forgot to mention, but the actual DAO token doesn't give you IP rights over any of the projects, but the IP NFTs that we have created, they can be then tokenized, and our members can buy into a specific IP that they're interested in. That makes sense.
Can you talk about the support that you provide to these new labs? Like, they're doing their research, they know what they're up to in that area, but how do you connect them? How do you explain to them the process? How can they increase, funding? Yeah, it's a social game at the end of the day. You need to sell your research as much as you need to show that it's actually viable.
Yeah, definitely. So first we provide the funding as support, and then we increase exposure to the labs. We always invite our grantees to do webinars and different series online. We write pieces around their research. We include them in our health reports and other public goods. We write a bunch of newsletters that we send around, so exposure is definitely increased, and there is an option for further funding with the IP NFT tokenization for their specific project.
Awesome, cool, thank you. If there are more questions for Maria, we'll have a panel now, so you still have time to think. But thank you.